Fáilte go dtí córas a gurán.
Fáilte go córainn an sa chóille.
Hello and welcome to Conversations in the Grove, a show about Druidry in ancient and modern times. Thank you for joining us for episode 2 of our second season. In our first season, we discussed the relationship between Druidry and animism, and we've made the first 2 full episodes of season 1 available for free. You can find them on Dunmore Druid Order's group Facebook page and on Dunmore Druid Order's YouTube channel. As part of our desire to help serve our community, we also make the first 15 minutes of all of our episodes available for free on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. And we ask you to please remember to like and subscribe. If you'd like to support our efforts, please consider becoming one of our valued Patreon supporters by going to patreon.com/conversationsinthegrove. Our Patreon supporters have access to all of the full hour-long episodes in addition to other perks. As we do at the beginning of each show, we would like to take a moment to appreciate, to honor, and to express our gratitude to the Native American ancestors of the Pikes Peak region, among them the Ute, Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Apache, and Lakota Sioux. And now here's Brendan with our opening prayer.
So this is my own rendering of an early medieval Irish prayer for pilgrimage or for going on a journey. May the land in which we journey be free from every sorrow. May the Trinity protect us wherever we go, Creator, Sustainer, and Redeemer. May every path before us be gentle. May man, woman, and child welcome us with open hearts. It is truly good, the journey we now embark on. Well does the fair lady show us a road, a path to life. Marshanbia.
Colin.
For today's show, we'll be continuing our discussion about the Irish saga, The Siege of Knocklong. If you haven't already read this saga, it is definitely well worth the read. It gives a very good account of several druids and their actions, and it also shows how one druid in particular is able to outsmart his opponents. So one of the sources of knowledge that helps us gain a better understanding of our Celtic ancestors, and by extension the druids, is literature. Author Sharon Pace MacLeod, in her book, Celtic Myth and Religion, tells us that after the introduction of Christianity around the 5th and 6th centuries, we begin to see written records produced by the Celtic peoples themselves. These were often produced in monasteries and were not always objective, and these writings were in many cases produced centuries after paganism began to wane. This is found on page 19. Now, all the same, literature still is a very good and valid source of information for us. So let's take a quick look at literature as it pertains to the Siege of Knocklong. And please note that this is a brief overview, and my pronunciations may in fact need to be corrected by my co-hosts and Brendan. So taking a look at Celtic literature, we're going to start at the very beginning part of it and just give an overall broad definition of Celtic literature, which is a body of writing composed in Gaelic and the languages derived from that. And that includes Irish, Scottish Gaelic, Manx, Welsh, and its sister languages, Breton and Cornish. From there, we kind of go down to Gaelic literature, which is literature of the Gaelic language countries, including Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. And then from there, we move down to Irish mythology, which basically follows the path of Celtic literature to Gaelic literature. And now we're at Irish mythology. And within Irish mythology, there are 4 cycles. The cycles are the mythological cycle, the Ulster cycle, the Fenian cycle, and the cycle of kings. So the mythological cycle is discusses a division within Irish mythology, and it includes the tales of the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Book of Invasions, which is also called the Book of the Taking of Ireland. Next is the Ulster cycle, which is like the other three, one of the four cycles of Irish mythology, and it includes medieval Irish legends and sagas. It's also known as the Red Branch cycle, and here's where I need help with pronunciation, the Iliad cycle and the Eltonian cycle. And we're moving on to the next cycle, which is the Fenian cycle, and it includes tales and ballads of Finn MacCool. It also includes tales about the Fianna, and it's also called the Finn cycle, or I believe it's pronounced the Oceanic cycle. From there, we move to the cycle of kings, and this includes stories of mythological and historical Irish kings, including Cormac MacArt and Brian Boru, and it's also called the historical cycle or cycles. Finally, within each of these four cycles, there are books. Now, among those books are the Book of Duncow, the Book of Leinster, the Yellow Book of Lecan, the Great Book of Lecan, and finally, the Book of Lismore, which includes the Siege of Knocklong. For the benefit of those who are or who have viewed our first episode and who are following along with us, I'm listing the link to access the Siege of Knocklong that we are using, and that's going to be on the slide that you're looking at right now. So moving right along, I'm going to turn things over to Ben and Brendan at this point and ask if they have any additional thoughts, any corrections they'd like to make, any comments they'd like to make regarding the aspect of literature and how it pertains not only to the Siege of Knocklong, but how it creates value to all of us as we are on our path in our course for studying Druidry.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the stories are like they're the most important part of the tradition. You know, they just really are, and the reason they are so important is that there just you wouldn't have, I don't think that, well, you just wouldn't, culture just doesn't really exist without it. Like without that kind of constant reminder of identity, constant reminder of, you know, what your ancestors have been through, what are the various forms of life that you're going to interact with, and how should you interact with those things, you know, whether it's you're in a battle, you're witnessing the birth of a child, you're, you know, getting married, you know, these big threshold moments in life, and they really focus a lot around those. And it's I was reading this article by Prunches McCanna, and you know, he's one of my favorite Irish scholars, and you know, one of the things that I loved that he said was that, you know, we really, the Druids gave us our identities. They were the ones who gave us who we are, and that's really important, because as time goes on and a whole bunch of other things happen, at all these points in Irish history that are really threshold moments in the history of the culture, so many of the more progressive and powerful figures that help to shape Irish history are always going back to these stories and reading them and understanding them, and they give something, you know, I think energetic to you, more than just, it's not just a mental process. There's an energetic exchange that you're getting when you hear a story or you read a story.
Ben, do you want to name that article by McCanna, just for our listeners if they want to?
Yeah, if I can find it.
Okay.
Where did I put it? Let me look.
Okay. Well, while you're ferreting that out on your computer, yeah, I'll just say a couple words. You know, as you mentioned, Arlene, there are these two, when we talk about Celtic literature, that there are really two primary streams. They're both insular traditions from the Isles. And one is the Brythonic or Welsh language tradition in the case of the particular Brythonic expression that was most literized. And then the Gaelic stream and it was mostly Irish that was put into text in the early medieval period. And really, as you named, this was a monastic practice, because as most folks perhaps that are listening know, originally, before the coming of Christianity, all the Celtic traditions were strictly oral. And so it was with the coming of Christianity that this written literary tradition was introduced. And we can talk more broadly about the literary tradition as incorporating oral practice as well, and oral dispensation. And I think that's really valuable. But in terms of what we possess today, and like the Siege of Knocklong and these types of narratives, they really are, I mean, in most cases, I think they're probably oral traditions that were put into text once the written practices were normative. And in this case, obviously, we're talking about in Ireland. And one other thing I'll just mention that's worth noting is that I think there used to be, in scholarship, there used to be a sense of skepticism about the degree to which these literary Irish, let's say, artifacts or products really contained pre-Christian transmissions, pre-Christian survivals, and that there's a sea change happening right now in regard to that, at least to a large degree. McConaughey was a proponent of this sea change. I am as well. Sharon MacLeod, who you mentioned, I'll say, I don't want to speak for her, but I think she is also, and others. There are other scholars that are beginning to view this in a slightly different light. John Carey is another great proponent of this, that actually there's more happening in the early Christian centuries related to Druidry than we previously imagined. And that there's as more texts are translated out of Old Irish, etc., there's more evidence emerging that suggests that the conversion to Christianity really was rather loose, and that in many ways what was going on with the Fili and their continuation of pre-Christian tradition, often but not always within monastic contexts where these literary objects were put to vellum, that it really did reflect much more of the Druidic tradition than had previously been assumed. And there are still people like Kim McCone and folks who are they call themselves, or others at least call, I don't know if they always refer to themselves this way, but other scholars call them anti-nativists, who insist that this is outrageous. And this is one of the things I'm addressing in my current academic work. But there's a stronger and stronger case that's building for a clear preservation of pre-Christian traditions in the Irish and the Welsh also, but especially in the Irish literary tradition. So I just wanted to mention that to give some more fodder to our viewers for framing a story like this that we're discussing.
And Brandon, if I could ask you, when you say a sea change, what do you see that being exactly? I mean, as far as comparing it to the, kind of to the older approach and to one that you favor. I'm curious. I know a little bit about the academics of this, but I don't know very much.
I think a default view for a long time was that the pre-Christian native traditions were not nuanced or sophisticated enough to produce the kind of literary tradition that we see in the insular texts.
Oh, okay, right.
And B, that the Christianization of Ireland in particular was so thorough and so miraculous and so totalizing that, of course, these are actually just all the products of a Christian mind. So it's really those are, as I see it anyway, as I kind of break it down in my own work, those are kind of the two primary assumptions that were made for decades and decades in scholarship by most people. There are folks like Eugene O'Curry and other Irish scholars through the decades that have taken an alternate view, but that's been kind of the default view. And that's what I generally would refer to as part of the anti-nativist, as it's called now, the anti-nativist approach.
Yeah.
So obviously, it probably goes without saying, but I take a nativist approach by contrast. And so,
yes, we wouldn't be welcome here if you didn't. Yeah.
So,
oh gosh, yeah. Well, and that is that's an interesting thing. I mean, because when you look, especially at, when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense in the sense that the people who were really first academically studying the Irish were the English. And a lot of that colonial perspective comes into the earlier studies. It's like, well, they're just savage, they're just a bunch of savages, and so it's that's an interesting point. It's a very interesting point.